Pope Leo XIV woke up feeling well and was about to have breakfast. It was a normal day or so, it seemed. What he didn't know was that within minutes, something would happen that could shake the church as we know it. The smell was of mildew and old incense. That forgotten wing of the monastery seemed frozen in time, and perhaps it truly was. Peeling walls, crooked crucifixes, windows fogged by decades of silence. The only light came from a trembling candle on the bedside table, and there, lying down, Father Anselmo knew he would not see the dawn. His body, consumed by old age and an illness doctors no longer named, trembled more from the weight of what he needed to say than from fever itself. His sunken, yellowed eyes stared at the ceiling as if searching for a sign of final divine authorization to do what had to be done. The quill trembled between his fingers. The paper, already yellowed before a single word was written, waited for the first line as if it understood the burden it was about to carry. And then, the old priest began. "If this letter reaches you, it means I no longer breathe beneath this sky. And if you ignore it, you may breathe a little longer but not in peace." The words spilled with the urgency of the dying. What unfolded was not just a denunciation. It was a spiritual testament, a confession, and a warning. Anselmo spoke of an organization operating within the church itself, a silent network, infiltrated into the Vatican corridors for over 100 years. It was not a cult, it was not Freemasonry, it was something subtler, more lethal, an idea, a pact between men who, in the name of faith, had sworn to protect the structure of the church, even if it meant betraying the gospel itself. Concilium Umbrae, he wrote boldly, the Council of Shadows. The letter detailed how this group manipulated conclave votes, silenced scandals, reassigned inconvenient priests to remote dioceses, and created smokescreens to hide crimes committed by men in cassocks. Worse, the letter suggested that the current Pope, Leo XIV, been elected as a result of such manipulation. "I do not accuse him of complicity," Anselmo wrote. "But his election was orchestrated. They chose him for his image, his purity, his compassion. They believed he could be a symbol, and for that they let him rise. But everything has a price." When he finished the letter, Anselmo sealed the envelope with red wax, stamped it with the ring inherited from his own mentora, silent symbol of a lineage that still believed in truth, and summoned the youngest monk in the convent, Brother Luca. "This envelope must reach the Pope, no one else." His voice was barely a whisper. "But Father, how? There's no time. Go, now." Luca obeyed, and Anselmo, at last, lay down. For the first time in many years, he slept in peace. He would never wake again. 2 days later, in Rome, the envelope arrived, discreet, without a sender. One of Pope Leo XIV's personal secretaries placed it alongside the morning documents reports, invitations, diplomatic protocols. Only the old seal, red wax with a worn crucifix, stood out. Robert Pope Leo XIV, as the world knew him, was sitting in his private library, surrounded by books, plants, and the sacred silence of early morning. He had a habit of starting his day reading Psalms, a steaming cup of tea by his side. But that day, something distracted him, an invisible weight in the air. When he saw the envelope, he frowned, opened it carefully, read the first line, and stopped. The world around him vanished. The tea went cold. The birds in the garden stopped singing gore. Perhaps he simply stopped hearing them. Each line of the letter was a nail driven into the cross of his conscience. When he finished reading, Robert was pale. His hands trembled. He read it again, and again, and again. He couldn't believe it, but neither could he ignore it. He knew the name of the sender. Anselmo was an old name, a respected theologian who had withdrawn from public life decades earlier. Never political, never ambitious. If he had written this, it was because he carried the weight of truth. He stood, letter still in hand, walked to the crucifix hanging on the far wall of the room, stood there for a long time, in silence. "My God, what have they done to me?" he whispered. And in that moment, everything changed. The man who had survived war, scandals, and the loneliness of the highest throne in the world now faced his greatest enemy: doubt. and it wore a cassock. Night fell over the Vatican like a heavy veil. In the heart of the Apostolic Palace, only one light remained on, that of the Pope's private study. Inside, Robert paced back and forth, Anselmo's letter still in his hands. He had read it at least 10 times, and yet each rereading seemed to hurt more than the last. He knew he couldn't trust many, but he needed answers, and for that, he had to begin with those close stand oldest. He secretly summoned the 3 most senior and experienced cardinals of the Curia, Angelo Moretti, Benedetto Alcarim, and Joseph Weiler, men of solid faith, with decades of service and invisible scars. If anyone knew anything about what lay behind those words, it would be them. The meeting was scheduled for late at night, in a discreet room once used for matters of state. Not even the Pope's aides knew it was taking place. When the 3 entered, Robert was already there, seated at the head of an old table, eyes weary, and the letter resting on the wood. "Thank you for coming. What we discuss here must never leave this room." His voice was firm, but a subtle tremor lingered beneath. "I need your honesty and your memory." He handed each of them a copy of the letter. Absolute silence as they read. Moretti's eyes narrowed. Alcarim furrowed his brow with gravity. Weiler removed his glasses, cleaned them slowly, and put them back on before finishing. "This," Moretti began, "is too serious to ignore, and too dangerous to accept as truth without proof," Alcarim added. "But have any of you heard of this before?" Robert asked. "Has any of you ever heard the name Concilium Umbrae?" Weiler hesitated. His eyes searched those of his colleagues. Then he met the Pope's gaze. "Yes, but never clearly. It was a whisper behind old walls, a legend among librarians and monks with nothing left to lose. I always thought it was exaggerated." "And now?" Robert pressed. "Now," Weiler paused. "Now, I fear it never was." Moretti leaned back in his chair. "I heard the name once, many years ago. An old cardinal, on his deathbed in a hospital, delirious, said, 'They're still there, the ones in the shadows, the ones who use the cross as a curtain.' I thought it was the fever. Maybe it wasn't." Robert crossed his arms. A chill ran down his spine. "And why has no one ever investigated?" "Because," Alcarim said, "those who chase ghosts usually disappear with them." A thick silence fell over the room. "The letter suggests my election was manipulated," Robert said more softly. "That I was part of a plan I never knew about. If that's true, I should never have become Pope." "No," Weiler replied with a firm look. "If it's true, that's exactly why you must remain." That sentence echoed. Robert closed his eyes for a moment. Then he stood. "From this point on, I'll investigate this myself. No scandal, no alarms. I need your loyalty and your silence. Someone within these walls knows the truth, and I will find it." The 3 cardinals nodded slowly, each one left without another word. Robert remained alone in the room. He picked up the letter once more, read Anselmo's signature, then looked at the cross on the wall. "May the light be stronger than the shadow," he whispered. And that night, the Pope ceased to be just a shepherd. He became a hunter. The Roman night was heavy, stifling, as if the sky itself sensed what was about to happen. It was past midnight when Robert put on the simple black cassock he wore only during spiritual retreats. No ring, no visible cross, no entourage, just him, his faith, and his doubt. He left the papal apartments through a side door and crossed the Vatican corridors in silence, each step careful, his soul unsettled. His destination, the Apostolic Secret Archives, an ancient, restricted section of the Holy See, to which only popes had full access, and even among popes, few dared descend to its deepest levels. The corridors there weren't just dark, they were heavy, as if the walls held more than documents. They held secrets, and they reeked of guilt. Robert carried a small oil lantern. He had rejected any modern device he knew that in that part of the Vatican, electricity was too symbolic. He needed old light to find buried truths. He descended 2 spiral flights of damp stone steps, stopped before a door marked with a papal crest, nearly faded by time, inserted the ceremonial key inherited from the previous pope, turned it with effort, and pushed open the heavy door, which groaned as if waking from a century-long sleep. Inside, the air was cold. Not from temperature, but from weight. Massive wooden shelves filled with scrolls, codices, and sealed boxes. Some documents sealed with blood. Literally. Here lay the most controversial decisions in church history. Political excommunications, silenced heresies, pacts with tyrant kings. Robert took a deep breath and began. He knew what he was looking for: names, records, votes, any trace of interference in the conclaves. He pulled a box marked with the symbols of the last conclave, the one that had elected him. Inside, dozens of reports, memos between cardinals, confidential suggestions about the progression of the sessions. And among the papers, something out of place: a sheet with handwritten Latin inscriptions, ink faded by time. He translated silently. He shall be the bridge, the image, the peace, but may he never know from where the wind pushed him. The signature, U.O. A code name? Or the initials of the Obra? Robert's stomach turned. He kept searching. In the second drawer, he found something even more disturbing: a list of unusual transfers made in the days prior to his election. Priests reassigned, advisors replaced, guards relocated. All done silently. And then, the final blow. A black and white photograph. Men seated in an old room. It looked like a retreat, judging by the furniture. 6 cardinals, 3 seminarians. A wooden crucifix at the center. But what froze Robert's blood was the symbol on the wall behind them, an inverted cross inside a golden circle. The same symbol from Anselmo's letter. And there, among the men in the photo, was him. Matteo Visconti. Younger, of course, but unmistakable. Robert brought a hand to his mouth, sat down slowly. The world was spinning. His mentor, the man who had guided him in seminary, who had prepared him for priesthood, who now served as his closest advisor. Could he be involved? Or was it just coincidence? But in that place, Robert already knew. In the Vatican, coincidence is not a word you write. He took the photo, hid it within the inner folds of his cassock, extinguished the lantern, closed the door, climbed the steps slowly as if each step added another weight to his shoulders. Back in his quarters, he hid the image in a secret compartment of his prayer room and knelt, not to ask for peace, but to ask for clarity. Lord, if he betrayed me too, show me how to separate the wolf from the shepherd. And for the first time in years, the Pope prayed in fear. The silver cutlery gleamed under the dim lights of the private papal dining room. The table, usually set for honored guests and visiting diplomats, was quiet tonight. Intimate. Intentional. 2 places only. Robert had ordered a simple meal, lentil soup, warm bread, and mineral water. Not for modesty, but for focus. He didn't want the food to distract from what mattered. Matteo Visconti arrived 10 minutes late. A deliberate act, perhaps. He entered without haste, his red robes flowing, his silver cane tapping softly against the stone floor. "You summoned me, Holiness?" he said, not bowing. "I did. Please, sit." They sat. A silence hung between them as heavy as the Vatican walls. Matteo poured himself water. Robert watched his every movement. "How long have we known each other, Matteo?" Robert asked. "More than 30 years, since your seminary days. You taught me Scripture. You heard my first confession. You were the one who told me I had the soul of a shepherd." Matteo smiled faintly. "You still do." Robert leaned forward, voice steady but sharp. "Then tell me, old friend, why did I find your face in a photograph with a symbol I hoped never to see again?" A pause. The clinking of cutlery ceased. Matteo didn't blink. "Because the world is more complex than Scripture prepares us for." That's not an answer. It's the only one you'll get unless you ask the right question. Robert placed a small envelope on the table. From it, he slid the black and white photograph toward Matteo. The older cardinal studied it. For a moment, his eyes darkened. "You went to the archives." "I had to." Then you already know. I know fragments, shadows, whispers. I want the truth. Matteo sighed, folded his hands. What you call truth is architecture. What you call corruption was preservation. Robert's voice dropped to a whisper. And what about the Holy Spirit? Free will? The divine hand that lifts one man over another? They lift the worthy. We ensure the world is ready to accept him. Silence. Robert stood, walked to the window, looked over the gardens where saints once meditated. Was I chosen by God or by you? Matteo remained seated. Both. You manipulated the conclave. We guided it for the greater good. Robert turned. There's a word for that. Heresy. Matteo stood as well, now face to face with the Pope. There's also a word for blind purity. Martyrdom. A beat. Do not pretend you are the first Pope to be lifted by hidden hands. You were just the first not to ask for them. And now, what happens if I expose this? If I cleanse the church with light? Matteo walked to the door, placed a hand on the handle, turned slowly. Then darkness will do what it has always done. It will protect itself. He opened the door. Be careful where you shine your light, Robert. Not all shadows flee. Some fight back. He left. Robert remained alone. The soup was cold, the bread untouched. He sat again, feeling the chill of betrayal, and whispered to no one. He didn't even deny it. The conclave archive was not where Robert wanted to be, but it was where the truth lived. Hidden beneath the apostolic palace, protected by both tradition and fear, this section of the Vatican was rarely touched after a new pope took office. The records of every conclave notes, unofficial accounts, and internal memos were kept in sealed drawers, not to be opened for at least a century. But Robert, as Supreme Pontiff, had the authority to access them. And tonight, he would. He had waited until after the Angelus, when the palace quieted and the courier retreated to their rooms. A trusted guard opened the passage for him, no questions asked. That man, whose name Robert had chosen never to know, had simply nodded. Loyalty sometimes bloomed in silence. Robert entered with a notebook, a fountain pen, and a small oil lamp. He didn't want anything electronic with him. What he was about to uncover didn't belong in the realm of servers and cables. He found the cabinet labeled Conclave MMXV7, the year of his election. It was an ornate wooden drawer, sealed with red wax and a papal emblem. He broke the seal with a blade, paused, and crossed himself. Then he opened it. Inside, dozens of folders, most typed, some handwritten, a few in Latin. He took them all to a nearby table and began reading. The early documents were benign official protocols, attendance lists, health declarations. But by the 10th document, the tone changed. A memo between two unnamed cardinals. His name rises too fast. Some are uncomfortable with the sudden shift. Recommend recalibration. Recalibration? Robert continued. A note dated 2 days before the final vote. 4 key votes have been secured. If Fraternus and DM hold firm, Leo's path is clear. Leo. That was the name he had taken. But these notes predated his election. It wasn't inspiration. It was strategy. He flipped to another report, psychographic analysis of the top candidates. It assessed their influence, temperament, popularity with younger clergy. Robert's file was the longest. Words like approachable, doctrinally safe, progressive in tone but obedient in action, repeated throughout. He wasn't elected by divine will. He was profiled, packaged, and deployed. Then he found the dossier. A manila envelope stamped reservatus. Inside, unofficial records of informal vote tallies. On day 1 of the conclave, Cardinal Ortiz had the clear lead, a strong traditional figure from Argentina. But on day 2, a shift occurred. Suddenly, Robert, barely mentioned before, jumped into second place. Then first. The data was cold, clinical, too perfect. And then came the most damning sheet. A document titled Operatio Umbrae, Latin, Operation of the Shadow. It was brief, just a few paragraphs. Written in clean handwriting, dated 1 week before the conclave. It included coded initials of 7 cardinals. All matched the regions of voting shifts. And next to Robert's name was a single phrase, "Asset in place, must never know." He dropped the paper. His breath caught, his knees buckled slightly, and he leaned on the table. The lamp flickered, as if reacting to the weight in the room. He gathered the sheets into his notebook, closed everything carefully, and left the drawer open. Let others see. Let history be confronted. Back in his study, Robert spread the documents on his desk like a man reconstructing a crime. He had never wanted the papacy. He had cried the night he was elected, but he had accepted the role as a servant. Now he realized he had entered not a holy office, but a stage. He was a character. A puppet. The door creaked. His private secretary peeked in. "Holiness, are you all right?" Robert didn't turn. "Call for Father Eugenio and Sister Marta. Tomorrow I'll need to speak with them about a new initiative." "Of course. Anything else?" Robert finally looked at him. "Yes. Bring me the names of all who served as security liaisons during the conclave, and everyone reassigned the week before." The secretary hesitated, then bowed and left. Robert turned back to the documents. The phrase rang in his head. "Asset in place, must never know." And now he knew. He looked at the crucifix on the wall, the Christ on the cross, nailed by both sin and silence. "Lord, if I was placed by impure hands, can I still be your instrument?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was a waiting breath. A test. The lamp burned low as Robert stayed up all night, rewriting his own beginning not as a chosen one, but as a man about to choose. Something had shifted. In the following days, Robert began noticing the small things first. A misplaced file, a whispered conversation that fell silent when he entered, a monk transferred without explanation. Then it became more obvious. One of the archivists, with whom he had spoken just days earlier, Brother Tommaso, had been reassigned to a remote monastery in Bavaria. No warning, no farewell. The official explanation was spiritual retreat, but Robert knew better. Then, a folder he had deliberately left half exposed on his desk, containing a portion of the Operatio Umbrae document, was missing the next morning. Only his secretary had access. But the man claimed ignorance with eyes that blinked too often. Late one night, Robert entered his private chapel for evening prayer. The lights were off. The door was unlocked. Inside, the confessional booth had been left ajar, the curtain pulled back, the seat cushion torn open at the seam. Not theft, a message. He was being watched. He was being warned. Still, he refused to back down. The next morning, he sent a discreet message to a man whose name had been erased from most Vatican ledgers, Father Alarico, a Jesuit historian exiled years ago for proposing dangerous theological correlations between church doctrine and medieval esoteric traditions. They met in a quiet garden outside Rome. Alarico, now in his 60s, wore civilian clothes and a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were alert, his voice like parchment, rubbed smooth by time. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "I need to understand what I found. Number, you already do. You want someone else to carry it with you." Robert handed him a copied excerpt of the oath he found. Alarico read it slowly, nodded. "Concilium Umbrae. I warned about them 30 years ago. I wrote about a system that served the institution while starving the soul. They didn't like it." "Who are they?" "No names. Just a method. Like mold in the walls. You don't notice until the foundation is cracked." Alarico pulled from his coat a small, worn notebook. "Take this. Inside is the last thing I wrote before they silenced me. I called it the theology of shadow. Men who love the church more than they love Christ. Where do I begin? Find the name that was never canonized, the one buried beneath a false heresy. That name will point you to where holiness was once denied, and where your answer hides." That night, Robert returned to the Vatican and spread Alarico's notebook across his desk. One phrase burned in his mind. They serve not God, but the preservation of the idea of God. And from that moment on, the silence around him was no longer just noise. It was war. Robert spent the next 2 days inside the restricted hagiographic librarian archive of saints, blessed figures, and those whose canonizations had failed, been stalled, or were mysteriously abandoned. He combed through index cards and handwritten volumes. Hundreds of lives lived in piety, then erased, until one name stopped him: Francesco della Torre, a 19th-century priest known for denouncing financial abuses within the Curia, beloved by the poor, disappeared months before his beatification process was to begin. Official reason: mental instability. Robert found only a single mention in an older volumaire, partially censored, where someone had scratched over a symbol, a cross within a golden circle. He ordered immediate access to the chapel, where Francesco had been buried, a forgotten structure near the edge of Vatican territory, sealed decades ago. At midnight, Robert entered the chapel alone with a trusted guard. Dust coated the altar. Statues were veiled in decay. Behind the main icon, he found a stone slab, loose. He pushed it open. Inside, a small iron box. Inside the box, aged parchment, wax seals broken, pages trembling from time and truth. Letters from Francesco, notes in Latin. One document read, "If I perish, let it be known that blood still cries from beneath the altar. They do not serve the Lamb, they serve the Obra." Another page. A list of symbols, codes, and initials. But before he could examine more, a harsh clang echoed through the chapel. An alarm. Someone knew he was there. He concealed the box beneath his robe. With the help of the guard, he escaped through a hidden corridor once used by wartime clergy. They returned to the papal apartments just before dawn. Robert locked the box in his prayer chamber. And as the sun rose, he stood at the window and whispered, "If what lies inside is true, the history of the Church will have to be rewritten." The iron box lay on the table like a relic from another time. Its weight was more than physical. It seemed to press down on the very air in the room. Robert had dismissed his staff for the morning. He needed solitude. This wasn't reading. This was unearthing. He opened the box with careful hands. Inside were brittle parchments sealed with symbols, fragments of torn letters, a rosary blackened with age, and a handwritten note in what looked like charcoal. "If you have found this, then you too are already hunted." He removed the documents and laid them out in a deliberate sequence. Some were written in old ecclesiastical Latin, others in Italian. A few had marginalia scribbled in Greek, perhaps later additions by della Torre himself. One letter stood out. The ink was bolder, the tone desperate. It was dated weeks before della Torre's disappearance. "They hear my confessions but never absolve me. They only take notes. I've seen the same faces in 3 different countries. They do not blink when I speak of Christ. They blink when I mention gold." Robert underlined that last sentence. Another document was a partial oath. Its heading was in ornate calligraphy, Sacramentum Umbrae. A ritual pledge, it seemed, recited in secret gatherings. "I do not serve the man who walks on water, but the vessel that keeps him afloat. Let the word be veil. Let the right be weapon. Let silence be sanctuary." It chilled him. Beneath that was a list of initials codified, many crossed out, but a few Robert recognized. One belonged to a cardinal still seated in the Curia, another to a current papal advisor. His pen trembled as he circled the names. And then he found a map, a hand-drawn floor plan of a basilica, no longer in use. Markings indicated hidden compartments, old tunnels, forgotten entryways. Scribbled in the corner: Obra meetings, Thursday vigils, candle only. He leaned back in his chair. The structure wasn't myth. It wasn't even hidden. It was operating. A knock at the door. He swept the documents back into the box, locked it, and turned. Matteo Visconti entered. "You've been quiet, Robert." "I've been reading." Matteo approached. His presence was colder than usual. Reading can lead to doubt. Doubt leads to division. Division already exists. "I'm simply trying to trace its roots." Visconti studied him, then placed a single envelope on the desk. "There's a document you haven't seen. One that confirms everything, but it will destroy more than it saves." He turned to leave, paused. Ask yourself, if truth collapses the church, is it still truth? He walked out. Robert opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, yellowed, stamped, with an ancient papal seal. Let it be known that in times of chaos, stability may require silence, and light may be shaded for its own survival. Let this oath remain within the walls of Peter, sealed and unseen, until the trumpet sounds. Below it, 8 signatures. One of them bore his family name. He sat for hours, and when night came, he lit a candle and whispered, "If I perish, let them know I saw the truth, and still chose the fire." The Vatican rose under a heavy sky. Rain threatened, but never fell. An unease hung over every stone. Inside his private quarters, Pope Leo XIV prepared in silence. Vestments laid neatly on the bed. The white cassock, the red shoes, the papal ring. He dressed without assistance. Every button fastened felt like a vow renewed. But for the first time in his life, the cassock didn't comfort him. It burdened him. He stepped into the hall of Clement VIII for a scheduled audience with the College of Cardinals. The room was filled with whispers and expectations. Not all knew what he had uncovered, but many sensed the tide shifting. When he entered, silence fell. He took the seat at the head of the long table. "Brothers," he began, "I come today not to teach, but to ask, how many of you have seen truth and walked past it?" Murmurs. One cardinal stood older. Spanish. Loyal. "Holiness, are you referring to the rumors?" "No." He placed the iron box on the table. "I refer to what I can prove." Gasps. He opened the box, took out 3 documents, passed them down. The oath, the signatures, the vigil map. He watched them read. Faces paled, hands trembled, others turned to stone. "I do not seek to destroy the church," he continued, "but I will not lead a flock in darkness while wolves wear white." Then, his voice dropped. "I found my name in their legacy, my own blood linked to their beginning. I was born into this, not by calling, but by design." The Spanish cardinal stepped forward. Then perhaps God used their ambition to place his servant. A murmur of assent followed, a rare moment of grace. But then, Visconti rose. "And what happens if we accept this? Publicly? How many will leave the church? How many nations will sever ties? How many wars reignite without the Holy See's stability?" Robert looked him in the eye. "Then let them leave. Let the world burn, but let the truth remain." A pause. Then, "I will no longer wear this cassock to shield their sins." He removed the ring, placed it on the table. "I remain Pope, but I refuse to be their puppet." Silence. Then, applause. Soft, scattered, but real. Outside, the rain began to fall. Inside, history began to shift. The Vatican slept lightly that night. Somewhere deep within the Apostolic Palace, Pope Leo XIV sat alone in the chapel of Tirsan, ancient, private place where centuries of popes had come to weep unseen. No one else knew he was there. No one but the crucified Christ staring back at him from the shadows. On the floor before him lay the parchment, the names, the seal, and the one truth he feared most. His own blood had helped build the very machine he now sought to dismantle. He lit a single candle. The air trembled. Then, slowly, he lifted a chalice from the chapel's altar. He poured red wine into it not for ceremony, but for memory. He whispered, "This is my body, placed here by others. This is my blood, tainted by their design, and still, I give it." He drank, and then he wrote. Hours passed. The candle burned low. He drafted a letter addressed not to the church, but to the people, the faithful, the broken, the doubting, the believing, the ones who had never set foot in a church but still looked to heaven when in pain. He didn't name names. He didn't reveal operations. Instead, He told the story of his soul. He confessed that he had learned, too late, that not all thrones are given by heaven, that some are purchased, that some are stolen, but that the God he served was greater than any system. He ended the letter with a vow. I will not let the sins of the few bury the faith of the many. If I must walk through fire, let it be with eyes open. He sealed the letter and placed it in his desk drawer. The next morning, before the sun rose, he called his most trusted guard. I need a secure line to Castel Gandolfo. And prepare a quiet route through the gardens. No press. Is this an escape, Holiness? No, a visit to the past. Hours later, dressed in a plain black cassock and flanked only by 2 guards, Robert entered the archives of Castel Gandolfo's, the summer residence of popes, now a repository of forgotten things. He requested 1 box. Family archive. De Sanctis. His mother's side. Inside, letters from diplomats, records of secret Vatican missions, a few newspaper clippings from the 1960s. Then, at the bottom, a letter, unopened, addressed to his mother, from his grandfather. Robert read it slowly. They call it the Obra, a structure meant to protect, but I no longer know what it is protecting. I was part of it. I lied for it, but I never wanted my grandson near it. If he ever becomes a priest, tell him. God speaks louder in silence than men do in shadow. His hands trembled. He stayed at the villa until nightfall. When he returned to the Vatican, he entered the basilica alone, stood beneath the dome, looked up, and saw it. A carving he had never noticed before. A lamb, pierced by a sword, yet smiling. He understood. He turned. Behind him stood Matteo Visconti. You weren't supposed to find that letter, Matteo said. But I did. And now? Robert walked toward him, slowly. Now I know I was born into the fire, not to burn others, but to burn what they built. Matteo's eyes flared. They will not let you do this. They already have. He handed Matteo the letter to the faithful. It goes public tomorrow, with or without your blessing. Matteo read it. His jaw clenched. Then, slowly, he folded it and nodded. Then God help us all. He already has, Robert replied, and walked away. The basilica was full, but silent. More than silence, there was stillness, a kind of reverent dread. Word had spread. Pope Leo XIV was going to speak. Not from the balcony, not through an encyclical, from the pulpit. On the altar stood only 1 chair, no assistants, no choir, just a single microphone, a crucifix, and the man they called the People's Pope, wearing the simplest white vestment he owned. He walked in alone. The crowd rose instinctively, but he did not raise his hands. He only nodded and began. My brothers, my sisters, I speak today not as your shepherd, but as a man. He paused. There are truths I've carried alone, out of fear, out of duty, perhaps out of pride. But I can carry them no longer. He reached into his cassock, pulled out a folded page. This is a letter I wrote in the chapel where popes go to cry. Yes, that place exists. And I wept there, not because I sinned though I have, but because I was deceived, and perhaps used. A gasp rippled through the pews. I was made pope not entirely by divine hand, but by human ones, ambitious ones. I found the documents, the oaths, the names. Some in the audience covered their mouths, others crossed themselves. But this is not a confession of defeat. It is a profession of freedom. He lifted his eyes. They wanted a symbol. I gave them a soul. They wanted silence. I offer truth. He stepped forward. Some say if I reveal these things, the church will collapse. I say if it does, then let it. Let it fall. Let it burn. And from its ashes, may a church rise that belongs to Christ again. From the crowd, a voice cried, Amen. Then another, then a dozen. Robert raised his hand. Today I will not resign. I will not run. I will stand. If they wish to remove me, let them come, but they will do so under the eyes of God and the gaze of the people." Behind him, the great bronze doors creaked open. A group of cardinals entered, robes red as warning, led by Matteo Visconti. They approached the altar. The crowd stiffened. Matteo stood before Robert. He looked at the Pope, then turned to the crowd and knelt. Gasps, then sobs. Matteo, once the architect of silence, spoke into the mic. "I was one of them. I believe the ends justified the shadows. But this man, is the first light I've seen in decades." He looked up. "Forgive me." Robert knelt too. "Only Christ forgives, but I welcome you home." The crowd erupted. Cheers, weeping. The bells of St. Peter's rang without command. History had bent, not through rebellion, through truth. Robert stood once more. "Tomorrow I will publish every name, every oath, every shadow. The world may hate us for it, but Christ will love us for it." He raised the chalice. "This is not the end of my papacy. It is its beginning." And for the first time in years, he smiled. The sun rose over Rome like it had for 2,000 years, but this morning felt different. Pilgrims filled the square. Journalists crowded the edges. Bishops and lay people alike stood shoulder to shoulder. The world was watching, waiting. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Pope Leo XIV stepped onto the balcony. No crown, no scepter, no ceremonial guards. Just him. He held a leather-bound dossier, the one that held the names, the symbols, the secrets. He raised it, then placed it gently on the railing, a symbolic act. He looked at the sea of faces, some confused, some hopeful, some afraid. He spoke. "I was placed here by shadows, but I will leave you with light." He opened the dossier, began reading, not the names, the truths. How structures were manipulated, how silence was weaponized, how purity was traded for influence. He didn't accuse, he didn't rage. He revealed. As he spoke, cardinals stood behind him, some in silence, some in tears. Some joined him at the railing. When he finished, he closed the dossier and placed a hand over it. "Let history judge the men. Let God judge the souls. But let the people see the truth." He turned to his right. A young boy stood holding a candle, the son of a groundskeeper. No lineage, no power, just innocence. Robert took the candle, lit it from the eternal flame behind the papal throne. He turned back to the people. "This is the fire they could not extinguish. From now on may it burn in you." He held the flame high. Silence fell. Then applause, then cheers, then something deeper, peace. That evening, in his private room, he knelt to pray. He whispered, "I was not the perfect pope, but perhaps I was the needed one." And as the candle burned beside him, he smiled. The sun rose over Rome like it had for 2,000 years, but this morning felt different. Pilgrims filled the square. Journalists crowded the edges. Bishops and lay people alike stood shoulder to shoulder. The world was watching, waiting. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Pope Leo XIV stepped onto the balcony. No crown, no scepter, no ceremonial guards. Just him. He held a leather-bound dossier, the one that held the names, the symbols, the secrets. He raised it, then placed it gently on the railing, a symbolic act. He looked at the sea of faces, some confused, some hopeful, some afraid. He spoke. "I was placed here by shadows, but I will leave you with light." He opened the dossier, began reading. Not the names, the truths. How structures were manipulated, how silence was weaponized, how purity was traded for influence. He didn't accuse, he didn't rage. He revealed. As he spoke, cardinals stood behind him, some in silence, some in tears. Some joined him at the railing. When he finished, he closed the dossier and placed a hand over it. "Let history judge the men. Let God judge the souls. but let the people see the truth. He turned to his right. A young boy stood holding a candle, the son of a groundskeeper. No lineage, no power, just innocence. Robert took the candle, lit it from the eternal flame behind the papal throne. He turned back to the people. This is the fire they could not extinguish. From now on may it burn in you. He held the flame high. Silence fell. Then applause, then cheers, then something deeper. Peace. That evening, in his private room, he knelt to pray. He whispered, "I was not the perfect pope, but perhaps I was the needed one." And as the candle burned beside him, he smiled. That night, when the lights of the Vatican finally dimmed, a single candle remained lit in the Pope's chamber. It was the same flame he had raised before the world, now trembling gently beside a silent prayer. Robert knelt one last time, not as the leader of the church, but as a man before God, and he asked for only one thing, that courage would never abandon him, even when faith felt fragile. Meanwhile, in the dark corridors of the Curia, doors began to open. Once sealed archives were being requested. Cardinals who had long avoided questions began to offer confessions. And in the silence of cloisters, the first signs of repentance began to bloom. The unthinkable was taking shape. The church, that ancient institution, was finally looking in the mirror and choosing to change. In public squares, candles were lit without invitation. Young people returned to churches, not out of fear, but hope. And across the world, simple priests, those who had long served in silence, began to raise their voices, finally feeling seen. Faith, once hidden behind gold and ritual, was beginning to breathe again in the faces of the people. And so that chapter in history came to a close, not with a resignation, nor with a fall, but with a rebirth. The Pope many had once called weak proved to be the strongest of them all. And beneath the Roman sky, as the midnight bells rang freely, a single truth echoed in the hearts of millions. The man who had once been placed on the throne by shadows was now lighting the way with his own flame.